Alright, so let's get after it like Chris Cuomo always said, right? Alright. So, this is Enemy coming at you. Alright, so this is, here's three quotables, right? Maybe four. You got David Davis. He was a U.S. Supreme Court Justice in 1850 to 1886. And he says, in the great book of Great Thoughts, he says, the Constitution of the United States is a law for rulers and people equally in war and peace, and covers with the shield of its protection all classes of men at all times and under all circumstances. So that means under COVID and anything else, right? No doctrine involving more pernicious consequences was ever invented by the wit of man than that any of its provisions can be suspended during any of its great exigencies of government. Such a doctrine leads directly to anarchy or despotism, which we're seeing today. And here's a freebie. Chief Justice Roberts said he doesn't care about what happened during Bush v. Gore, because back then they didn't have riots. So basically he's saying that as long as you guys threaten and bully and say, hey, this is what we're gonna do, pretty much terrorize and stuff, he'll bend at the will. That's not a judge, a justice, or a leader of any kind. So Chief Justice Roberts, he's got to go too. You have Erasmus Darwin, not Charles Darwin, probably no relation. He said, he who allows oppression shares the crime. Okay? So, if you're cool with what's going down. You have Clarence S. Darrow. And he says, you can only protect your liberties in this world by protecting the other man's freedoms. You can only be free if I'm free. And that's what America's about, baby. Here's another one from Dante Alighieri. He's Italiano. And he said, mankind is at its best when it is most free. This will be clear if we grasp the principle of liberty. We must recall that the basic principle is freedom of choice. My body, my choice. Which saying many have on their lips, but few in their mind. So just because you talk about it doesn't mean you about it. And we see that today with everybody. They all talk a good game, but they really ain't about shit. So that's all we want. We don't really want people talking about it. We want people about it. You know what I mean? We want real people today, right? That whole new year, new me. If you really say that, then frick you. Probably really ain't about it. You know what I mean? So let's get into some articles here real quick about the election fraud and stuff. What's going on? Here's Fox News, and they're talking about New York Times previously sounded alarm on how easily electronic voting machines can be hacked, because now they're backtracking. They're like, because now that stuff is happening, because they're like, the kids that are like, no, he's doing this and da 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 da. But then all of a sudden, when the parents come involved and they check what's really going on, everybody's got some blood on their face, and but people are trying to clean it up. That's what the left is like. And that's what's happening right now, and we're seeing it all the time, and it's getting annoying. When it's enough, it has to stop. This new year ain't about that kind of shit. Now, Alright, so you have University of Michigan professor urged electronic votings have to go in 2018, but now he's backtracking because he probably got a briefcase full of cash in his trunk of his car. You know what I mean? It's open secret. New York Times has joined the vast majority of the mainstream media in dismissing any concerns President Trump's legal team has raised amid the challenges of the 2020 presidential election results, including the possibility that ballots from election voting machines were tampered with. However, the Times previously sounded the alarm about how vulnerable machines can be to hackers. Back in 2018, New York Times opinion shared a video on its YouTube page called How I Hacked an Election. The video features University of Michigan computer science professor J. Alex Halderman, who urged that electronic voting machines have to go. Like, a lot of these people have got to go. Halderman demonstrated a mock election he organized at his university using obsolete machines that are commonly used in normal elections to have Michigan students vote on which school is the best, their own or an arch rival, Ohio State. Remember this. After the chaos of the 2000 election, we were promised a modern and dependable way to vote. I'm here to tell you that election voting machines, Americans have got to solve the problem of voting integrity. They've turned out to be an awful idea. Paper ballots you just can't have. You know, some things you just got to stay like the Flintstones with, but some things you got to go Jetsons with. And voting is Flintstone. Haldeman said that's because people like me can hack them all too easily. I'm a computer scientist who's hacked a lot of electronic voting machines. I've even turned one machine into a video game console. And imagine what the Russians and North Koreans can do when that's all they do, because they have nothing, but they don't have no parks, no water, they don't have no fun, they don't have nothing to do there, so they just do this kind of stuff. So that's why we gotta open America back up too. You know what I mean? So let's do this. Let's get it to work so we don't have to do this kind of stuff. While the Department of Homeland Security, Cyber Security, and Infrastructure Security Agency concluded the November 3rd vote was the most secure election in history, but in 2016 they were talking about Russia, Marsha, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, come on, this is more fickle than any of my ex-girlfriends ever were, and that's saying a lot. Okay, so come on, can we get real here, people, and not just be like, oh, but this is my baseball team, and that's this baseball team, and I like this person, and so I just want to. That's cult-like personality, that's cult-like shit, and that's not, you're not an individual. And that's how they can boop, boop, get you in a kennel, like a cattle. And if you don't want to be like that, then start being yourself. I'm missing out a Pacific machine model, the Advocate TS and TSX, which was used in several states during the 2016 election, including Georgia, Florida, Texas, Pennsylvania, which seems to be deja vu. Could be vulnerable to cyber attacks. That can change votes, but now he's singing a whole different tune, which is really crazy, right? Let's skip through this article a little bit, right? Because this is a lot of the same stuff. The hacker is then able to hijack the ballot programming and then let an election copy the invisible malicious code onto the voting machines. Finally, the malicious code silently steals the votes. Kind of like how the bank silently steals a lot of your money. In front of the Michigan students, Haldeman announced the winner from a printout of the election ballots that showed Ohio State as the winner, sparking plenty of boos from the crowd as accusations of the election being rigged, right? Well, now, I think 2016, one was saying this side's rigged, and the other one was like, no, just like, remember when Obama won, everybody was like, oh, the birth is the thing, right? Everybody's going to do this thing, and now I think that all this is coming to a head, like kind of like when you put baking soda and stuff and vinegar in a paper mache volcano, it's coming, right? That's what's happening now. And I think that what's going to be coming ahead is what we're going to be talking about in a second, is more important to squash all this in a new era, rebirth into a new thing and a new stuff, and actually start being on all of us can be on the level playing field. And I think that's very important. I think that why anybody is against that is kind of like childish, in my opinion. There's a good reason we computer scientists are paranoid. It's a golden age for hackers. Ooh. After Alderman admitted to the students that he hacked the voting machines, he revealed that the paper ballots showed that Michigan handily won the election. Michigan won in a landslide, and I could say this confidently because I have the real results from the safest and simplest solution, paper ballots. And right now, and we're seeing in a lot of these states, there's no paper backup. The USB stuff has been missing, and if this was your boyfriend or your girlfriend, Berber, and they were talking about cheating stuff, and they couldn't find you couldn't find anything to vouch for them or anything, you'd be like, no, you cheat. This is you're guilty as fuck. We all know this. Come on, taking them to Maury or Jerry Springer, we'd be doing all kinds of stuff, not just be like, oh, just accept it. Oh, it's all cool. You know what I mean? That's not what we do, right? That's what Hillary Clinton would do, but that's not what we would do. Now, let's talk about something that happened that history always repeats. It doesn't always repeat, but it sure does rhyme, right? The disputed election of 1876. In the presidential election of 1876, Democrat Samuel Tilden ran against Republican Rutherford B. Hayes at the end of Election Day. No clear winner emerged because the outcomes in South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana were unclear. Both parties claimed victory in those states, but Republican-controlled returning boards would determine the official electoral votes. Republicans and Democrats rushed to these three states to watch and try to influence the counting of the votes, and the returning boards determined which votes to count and which to throw out the votes. If they deemed them fraudulent, the returning boards in all three states argued that fraud, intimidation, and violence in certain districts invalidated votes. Then they threw out enough Democratic votes for Hayes to win. All three returning boards awarded their states electoral votes to Hayes. Meanwhile, in Oregon, a strange development added to the state to the uncertain mix. Hayes won that state, but one of the Republican electors, John W. Watts, also a postmaster, and U.S. Constitution forbids federal office holders from being electors. Watts planned to resign from his position in order to be a Republican elector, but the governor of Oregon, who was a Democrat, disqualified Watts and instead certified a Tilder elector. Some shenanigans. Electors cast their ballots in capital states on December 6, 1876. Generally, the process went smoothly, but in four capitals, Salem, Oregon, Columbia, South Carolina, Tallahassee, Florida, and New Orleans, Louisiana, two set of conflicting electors met and voted so that the U.S. Congress received two sets of conflicting electoral votes. At this point, Tilden had 184 electoral votes, while Hayes had 165, with 20 votes still disputed. The Constitution stipulates that the electoral votes will be directed to the President of the Senate, who was Republican Thomas W. Ferry. Although Republicans argued that he had the right to decide which votes to count, Democrats disagreed and argued that the Democratic majority in Congress should decide. A compromise was reached, and on January 29, 1877, the Electoral Commission Act established a commission of 5 senators, 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. 5 representatives, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 5 Supreme Court justices, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 1 independent, which they just would all be apolitical, in my opinion. To decide which votes to count and resolve the dispute. However, the independent Supreme Court justice refused to serve on the commission and was replaced by a Republican justice. Although Hayes did not initially support the commission, he changed his mind because it would enhance the legitimacy of the eventual winner. The commission voted 8-7 to award the electoral votes from South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana, and 1 from Oregon to Hayes. However, Democratic members of Congress threatened to prevent the count of electoral votes and delay the resolution of the election with frequent adjournments and filibusters. With the threat of delay, Democrats hoped to win some concessions from Republicans. 2 issues interested Democrats: restoring their control of governments and thus white supremacy in the South, and removing the last of the federal troops and a federal subsidy for railroads. However, it is doubtful that Hayes, his supporters, and Democrats reached any sort of deal beyond what Hayes promised to do in this letter of acceptance. Samuel J. Randall, the Democrat Speaker of the House, realizing that creating chaos would backfire on the Democrats, finally filled with the filibusters out of order and forced the completion of the count. In the early hours of March 2nd, 1877, with 185 votes to Tilden's 184, Hayes was declared the winner 2 days before he was inaugurated. While Hayes strongly supported African Americans' right to vote and protection of their civil rights, he had little influence in the South. By the time he took office, only federal troops still in the South protected Republican governments were limited to small areas surrounding state houses in the capitals of New Orleans and Columbia. Hayes insisted that Democrats in South Carolina and Louisiana pledged to uphold the civil and voting rights of blacks and white Republicans. Once the Democrats agreed, Hayes pulled the remaining federal troops out of the South, and white Southerners quickly turned their backs on their pledges, systematically disenfranchising black voters through poll taxes, literacy tests, and intimidation. Democrats in the South created a segregated society that used terror and violence to oppress African Americans. And that is their right. Hayes had little power to control the Democrats in the South. That's what they want you to know. Hayes sincerely believed in the importance of protecting civil rights for African Americans, which I don't call them that, I call them blacks, okay, because African American is a high name, which means second class citizen. It's pretty much what you're saying, right? So I'm not with that. But why he was so quick to walk away from them? Part of the issue was that he had little control over protecting these newly enfranchised citizens. The Democratic House of Representatives refused to appropriate money to pay for federal troops in the South, and many believed that it was counterproductive to fight home rule. The president had little choice but to remove the last of the federal troops in the South. Once those federal troops were gone, Hayes had little power to control the Democratic government in the South. Hayes did protest, although in the end inefficiently. He bitterly complained in his diary, for example, about the fraud, intimidation, and violence of the most atrocious character that white Southerners used to win elections in 1878. He then used his presidential veto multiple times to try to preserve some elements of federal oversight over African American voting. But his efforts did little, and white supremacy dominated